I'm Jonathan Shopley, and I'm joined by
Simon Brown.
And we're from Natural Capital Partners, and what we want to do is over the next 30 minutes cover off 6 themes, but we're going to do that. We're going to present for 20 of those and take questions for the last 10. And the way in which you can ask questions is on that little screen to the right of your computer. We'll collect those at the end, and Simon and I will address them. Now, what we're going to cover is the fact that many of you knew us as the Carbon Neutral Company, and perhaps those who've been around for a while even as Future Forests. So we've taken on a new name, and the question is why, and why is natural capital so important? So the next theme that we'll pick up is the history of natural capital, capitalism, what's different about it, who's leading in its use, who's taking, or what are the drivers for taking natural capital mainstream, and what our approach is. So I'm going to start off and explain what has been behind the 3 brands that define our 18 years in this space. In 1997, we started in business as Future Forests, a B2C business to consumer company offering carbon neutral lives, weddings, holidays to UK citizens through British woodland creation. So we started off in the climate space, which at that stage was rising up as an issue of concern. 2005, we rebranded as the Carbon Neutral Company because we really had evolved as our clients in the UK expanded to clients across Europe and the United States, and also looking for solutions that went beyond just woodlands in the UK. So we have, over that period, started to provide portfolios of carbon credits, renewable energy instruments to help our clients meet their climate objectives. And then over the last 4 to 5 years, again, clients who've been focused very heavily on climate change took great interest in many of the co-benefits associated with some of their carbon projects. And that has taken us into related areas of carbon, renewable energy, water, biodiversity, and communities in the supply chains of many of our clients. And so we found ourselves almost a little bit back where we started, but focusing on natural capital, and say a couple of words about what that means. And so Natural Capital Partners now is a company that hasn't left any of our history behind, but is simply expanding into new areas of services to our clients as they require them.
Okay, so I'll just expand a bit on this question of why a focus on natural capital and the context. So natural capital really is born out of this increased awareness, concern, and sense of opportunity. If you look back 50 years, you can see where this came from. Some of the books, some of the reports, publications like the Brundtland Report that have informed opinion, some of the key UN frameworks leading to COP21 that's ahead of us, the man-made natural disasters, the formation of NGOs, campaigns, and some of the key company responses. And in our view, natural capital kind of summarizes the sustainable development opportunity for businesses. The concept positions natural capital alongside 3 other sources of capital: human, financial, and manufactured. And then it describes 4 key strategies for generating a sustainable return on natural capital. These 4 strategies are really around improving returns on natural capital from increased resource efficiency and eco-productivity, improving the capital utilization from programs around zero waste or moves towards circular or cradle-to-cradle solutions, accelerating profitable growth by adopting service-based business models that are less resource intense and focus on delivering the benefit rather than the stuff, and investing back into nature, restoring and enhancing nature's ability to provide. So the model the model behind natural capital is just quite simple, but very powerful, and you need to be joining up the dots around these challenges. In essence, it's a process for decoupling the growth of your business from the negative impacts along the value chain on people or environment, and it's a way to remove the constraints to growth from things such as resource access or resource scarcity or resilience in the supply base. It requires you really to think through three fundamental things. Firstly, the dependency that you have on natural capital and the services that nature provides, the impacts that you have on the key drivers of change that affect nature or affect natural capital, and how these impacts affect nature's ability to continue to provide the ecosystem services that you need. So it's a circular model. And there are many leading brands that have begun to build this model into their growth strategies, and we'll have a look at some of those in a minute.
Thanks, Simon. I mean, you've talked about the concepts of natural capital, and what I'd like to do is just spend a minute thinking about, how they become practical within businesses. And it's a big jump, I guess, from impact on environment to resilience of natural capital assets. And either of these two beautiful pictures here on the slides will provide a little bit of an analogy. The river flowing through is the sort of the flow, and that's sometimes, you could equate that to the way businesses think about their emissions. Every year we emit, year on year we might commit to a target of reducing that by 10%. But as we have that interaction with the environment, they affect the natural assets in these two pictures. They might be a mangrove swamp or an area of rainforest, and it affects them in ways that may enhance, protect, or diminish their ability to provision with clean water, with wood, with biodiversity. So in business terms, sometimes it's easy to sort of think about this as moving from P&L mindset, where you're tackling flows, to a natural capital balance sheet. So you're looking at the assets that provide into your supply chains, into your productivity. One thought about these natural assets is that they're powerful. Some estimates have put the value of free ecosystem provisioning at almost the same value of world trade on an annual basis. So whether that be bees pollinating some of our fruit trees through to clean water provision, which we simply take for granted, these are powerful, and they're complex. And they're complex primarily because they're co-owned. Businesses are used to owning all their assets and having control over them. With natural assets, if you look at this rainforest here, that might belong, as it were, or be owned by a state or the federal government in Brazil. There may be indigenous people who feel that they own the provisioning power of those assets. And so, one of the things that has really informed the partners piece of our new identity as natural capital partners is the fact that as we start to value and understand the opportunities and the threats posed by our management of natural capital assets, that we are going to have to form partnerships that we may not have done in the past.
Okay, so these are powerful visions, powerful analogies, and they're inherently collaborative and looking all the way along the value chains in which you operate. So just try to pull out some examples. I think all of these examples are ones where they're joining the dots up on some of these things, enhancing the flow, enhancing business growth, and the interdependency on natural capital. So in many ways, Caring's analysis and publication of the environmental P&L for Puma is a milestone initiative. It's also open source, so if you study that, there's a lot of materials there to learn from. More on this in a moment. I think another great example is Dow Chemicals, Valuing Nature, which is it's a comprehensive transformational growth strategy based on this concept of natural capital, aiming to deliver $1 billion in value through projects. I put Nestle's shared value strategy up there, which again I think is a sort of a fundamental rethink or redesign or re-examination, based I think on a fairly simple idea that if there's no nature, there's no Nestle. I heard from Nestle use that phrase. I also think Plan A from Marks and Spencer's is both a milestone in terms of businesses' response to the challenge and opportunity for sustainable growth, and Plan A 2020 is really still at the forefront of best practice and building explicitly into it the concept of natural capital, natural resources. But I'd like to do a bit of a deep dive into a few of these. So Puma's environmental P&L was established in 2011, really as a better way of thinking about how to win as a major sport and apparel brand. It puts a value on the environmental cost or contribution to its product's profitability, and in doing so it enables them to drive new thinking around product design, innovation, and new sources of value to their consumer and back to their business. So I encourage those that haven't to really study this. There's a lot of material out there. The next example is Sky. Sky became certified carbon neutral 10 years ago, and they've remained so ever since. Now they have a dependency on the Amazon rainforest for programming, and their audience is passionate about it. And yet their operations and their value chain emit a measurable amount of greenhouse gases that are a cause of climate change. And climate change is a threat to the forest, and deforestation is a further driver. So they're addressing their impact on climate change through carbon finance projects that protect the forest. So they're starting to join up the dots between the impact they have, the actions they can take, and the dependency they have on this phenomenal natural asset, the Amazon. And a third example is a sort of more complex collaborative example that's underway in the tea sector. Mount Melange here is at the heart of tea production and was where the first African tea was grown. Tea in Malawi provides the livelihood for most of the rural population and is under threat from climate change, deforestation, soil degradation, and a host of other social license to operate type challenges. So tea actually from Malawi adds the deep colour in your brew. And Malawi Tea 2020 programme is really an integrated plan to ensure that we can continue to be able to drink it. It's about restoring the natural capital on which tea is grown. It's a fundamental part of this plan that considers the profit of the estates, the livelihoods of the workers, living wage, profit of smallholders, and fundamentally the environment, forestation, reforestation, soil productivity, and climate resilience.
Simon, those are great examples of companies taking a leadership position as they sort of understand and sense the value and the importance of natural capital and some of the assets that they don't necessarily own but benefit from. What's been interesting is that over the past 5 years or so, these individual companies have sort of linked up into the Natural Capital Coalition, which includes some big name brands like Unilever and Coke, and many academics, many NGOs, many consultancies, and people recognize that if the concept of natural capital is going to have currency in business, we need processes and approaches that can be applied without having to take the sort of bleeding edge every time. These the words on the screen are taken from the mission of the Natural Capital Coalition, and one of the main activities that they're engaged in at the moment is the development of a natural capital protocol, which defines a 10-step process, sort of summarized in the bottom right-hand side, covering 4 broad areas of activity, of framing the issue, scoping out natural capital assets, measuring and valuing those, and then applying those within the business. Interestingly here, I mean, this is a protocol that's being evolved mainly to help business make better decisions around their exposure to their ability to affect natural capital assets. It's not being developed as a reporting protocol per se, although it may over time develop into something like that. We're members of the Natural Capital Coalition, and we know and we're following and participating in the evolution of this protocol, which will be published after a series of piloting exercises and improvement exercises mid of next year, and I think represents a little bit of the maturity we saw in the climate and carbon space, that over the years basically disparate and sometimes very different approaches coalesce into certain methodologies and services, and I think the Natural Capital Coalition's work is going to prove to be very valuable in the future.
I think the development of the Natural Capital Protocol, the framework and the practices echo the journey of that we've been on, from future forests to through carbon neutral to natural capital partners, as Jonathan said at the start. We find ourselves increasingly working with clients to deliver natural capital impacts beyond this focus on carbon, so decoupling the growth and increasing the scope for collaboration and innovation. So we're building on the experience we have of carbon finance to target climate action, linking that to water stewardship, forestry, social impacts on health, opportunity for livelihoods and empowerment. And we're adapting many of those frameworks that have been proven to help clients make these measurable impacts, reduce the negative, strengthen the dependencies. So we're supporting the Natural Capital Coalition to refine that protocol, to help clients to develop the best practice examples around the 4 key strategies that I referenced at the start. So we're very much about trying to help clients take action that can then be reflected through the Natural Capital Program to strategies that build natural capital over time.
Thanks, Simon. That actually takes us to the end of the formal presentation, the 20 minutes that we mentioned that we would use to share some of our experience and thinking about the past and the future. We've had a couple of questions come through, and we've got a little under 10 minutes to deal with them. And if you, by the way, the lines are open. If you do have questions, if you want to add, please do so. The first one's quite meaty, and I'm going to read it out. Is it appropriate to sum up different types? And if yes, is there a way to avoid burden shifting to make sure there's a balance between different types of capital? And the reason why I think that's interesting and meaty is I think one of the challenges that we've had to recognize as we broadened our scope from climate, which is an incredibly fungible issue. In other words, a greenhouse gas emission somewhere in the world can be neutralized by a counteracting activity somewhere else. The issue with natural capital is it is highly contextual. Simon, you talked, and I'm going to turn to you in a moment, you talked a little bit about Malawi and the tea sector there, but the issue is the value of water versus access to firewood versus some of the access to employment associated with the natural woodland on Mount Malanje, have different values in the context of what's going on in Malawi. So I think one of the greatest challenges for the Natural Capital Protocol is to give us a process and a set of tools that allow us to put our arms around some of these things. But I take great comfort from the fact that the work that is now going on, taking all that great stuff that leaders have done, is to try and develop a process and a mechanism of looking at natural capital, but without losing that contextual value. And the fact that the protocol is being developed as a tool for management, a tool to set strategy, means that making those judgments as to whether in Malawi employment is more important than fuel provision and what sort of values you put on that, I think is really, businesses are not going to be confused by this. Businesses are always evaluating risks and value when they enter new markets or develop new products. So this isn't really such a terrible challenge. But there are no baked-in answers, and I think it's going to be a lot more complex than the climate work that we've done in the past. Simon?
I think, yes, it is appropriate to sum up the different types of capital. I think the 4 perspectives are much more powerful than the 2 perspectives, the financial and mechanical, if you like, capital, or manufactured capital, that have been the traditional focus for business. In terms of avoiding burden shifting, I think actually the concept of natural capitalism sort of mitigates against that, because that circular model I referred to isn't shifting the burden, it's recognizing the interdependency. The business activity, financial and manufactured capital, has an impact on the drivers of change of natural capital that provide ecosystem services on which the business operations depend. So we're joining the dots up on this. And I don't think it's a burden shift from one to the other. I just think it's a very helpful perspective to bring to inform a sustainable growth and innovation vision and strategy for the future.
Thanks. There's a lot more that could be said, but there's another question.
It's a big question, that, I think.
The next one up is how to link natural capital to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And those were announced, I think, back in September, Climate Week in New York City. And in fact, I was there for that particular event, and it was intriguing because, of course, I think there are 17 of them. And at the sort of formal event, various people stood up and said, these are all absolutely critically important, but for me, if we don't solve climate change, none of these others will stand a hope in hell. And then, of course, there are quite a few of them that are associated with social capital, so access to education, gender equality, etc. But, so much of our journey has been driven by the fact that under the Millennium Goals, most of our clients were deeply interested in the extent to which their carbon finance projects were delivering against these other, in categories of co-benefits, whether that be biodiversity or access to employment and the like. So I would say that the links are naturally there. I think the last time I totaled up, probably about 12 or 13 of the Sustainable Development Goals have direct connections to elements of natural capital. And so I think it's another framework that provides real help. Just one final comment, and then I'm going to hand to you, Simon, is that one of the things that we've already recognized with when you apply any protocol or methodologies, you need data to start calibrating, qualifying, and then quantifying these disparate sources of value. And I think one of the things that the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly the focus that they've got on metrics, developing data that is accessible so we can start tracking our process, is going to be very helpful to the application of natural capital concepts.
So I mean, I think it's a very strong alignment. Natural capital, is I think is baked in actually to the Sustainable Development Goals, and one of our key frameworks in terms of how we've been measuring the impact from the action that we're helping clients to take through carbon finance correlates directly to a number of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And they do very specifically address a lot of the elements of natural capital, whether it's marine, forest, soil. It also extends that into social opportunity, empowerment, and manufactured and financial. So I think it's a really exciting, very powerful set of goals that can really add value to growth strategies and link very closely to natural capital.
Thanks. Look, I do acknowledge that a couple more questions have come in, but we have run out of time, and I think asking people to take 30 minutes out of a busy day is probably all we should do at this stage. We will, in the coming months, be revisiting and scheduling a number of webinars to sort of track developments in the space. So that'll be an opportunity to come back to some of these questions. I'd really like to thank you all for attending and for your questions. And by the way, a recording of the webinar will be available on our website as of next week. With those questions and all of the complexities that are around them, we get a sense that there are real opportunities to develop a dialogue with you, which include many of our clients of many years, and thank you for helping us evolve into the space. If you have any questions, any suggestions, any things you're doing that you'd like to share with us and this audience, please be in touch. Contacts are on the slide. And again, thank you so much for joining today. We're going to close the webinar. Until next time, farewell.